The 1970s was a major time in America. The civil rights movement had ended in the late 60s, the Vietnam War would go on until the mid-70s, Watergate was just around the corner, and the world of film would see some of the most groundbreaking works that would change cinema forever. Films like Jaws created the summer blockbuster, while a little indie movie called Star Wars would change the landscape forever. But there was another major player in the world of film during this time, and that was the genre of film that would come to be known as blaxploitation. For those that don't know what blaxploitation means, the term comes from combining black and exploitation when talking about films typically created by and starring black people. These films would typically deal with themes of empowerment and self-sufficiency among the black community while also fighting against stereotypes and racism that was and sadly still is prevalent today. It's generally believed that the first blaxploitation movie was Marvin Van Peebles' Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song. As the decade went on, more blaxploitation films would get made like Shaft, Superfly, and Dolomite, which the making of that film was recently captured in the 2019 Netflix film Dolomite Is My Name, starring Eddie Murphy. While many look back fondly on blaxploitation films, many African-American critics were not in favor of the genre. Many pointed to how it creates bad stereotypes for the African-American community, as many of the films star characters that are pimps, drug lords, and prostitutes, while dealing with subject matter of drug dealing, violence, and sex. Despite these criticisms, the genre continued to boom throughout the 70s, tackling more and more genres. While it would seem that many films of the blaxploitation era were comedies and action films, many that were made were actually horror films. Before the 70s, black people in horror films was very rarely ever the focus of the film, but mostly just to be there to die. That was until George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead. This was the first time a horror film had a black lead, and because of that film, it would not be the last. In 1972, the first blaxploitation horror film, Blackula, was released. This film would begin the trend of taking a white horror figure like Dracula or Frankenstein and turning them black and setting it in modern day. Directed by William Crane and starring William Marshall, Blackula tells the story of African Prince Mamuwalde, who, after a dinner at Count Dracula's manor, gets bitten by him, his wife is murdered, and he's doomed to live out his life as a vampire. 2 centuries later, he's awoken and begins feasting on the residents of LA while falling in love with a woman he believes to be his wife. While it may seem like a typical vampire story, Blackula tackles themes of identity and racism, which helps it fit perfectly in the blaxploitation genre. However, the film does have its faults. While it may tackle themes of racism, the film doesn't act on it much besides addressing that some cops are racist and that Dracula was a racist as well. What's more perplexing is that the film leads us to believe that because of what Dracula did to him and his wife, that Blackula would go and attack white people out of revenge. But by the end, he only sucks blood from one white person while the rest are black people. Maybe the film is trying to take a more empowerment stance with him turning other black people into vampires. It unites them more, but there's no presence of a major white villain anywhere, so it's an idea that's well-intentioned but not the best executed. Not only that, but the film also has poor representations for the LGBTQ community as well as women. The first 2 people Blackula kill are gay men that purchase his coffin, and they're portrayed about as stereotypically as you'd expect from the 70s. Not to mention the police pretty much only address them as the F word. As for women, they're mostly reduced to either a victim or support from the sidelines. Most of the women have little to no character and feel poorly represented. While the film is groundbreaking in having a black lead in a horror film with a black director helming the project, it feels like its good intentions were enough to make it a truly standout film. But even though critics were mixed on it, audiences loved it, so much so that by the time the film left theaters, it had grossed over $1 million. This would cause many more blaxploitation horror films to be made, like Blackenstein, Dr. Black, Mr. Hyde, Sugar Hill, and a sequel to Blackula, Scream, Blackula, Scream. By the end of the 70s, blaxploitation began to die out, many pointing to the beginning of the end being Rudy Ray Moore's blaxploitation horror film, Petey Wheatstraw. Despite the genre dying out, the effects are still felt today. Many remakes and reboots are about famous blaxploitation films. There have been 2 Shaft films since the original and a 2018 remake of Superfly. But it's horror films that have seen some of the biggest impact. Because of the blaxploitation era of horror films, many mainstream horror films star black actors and are made by black creators. Jordan Peele has become one of the most successful black creators in the field of horror today, writing and directing both Get Out and Us, and winning the 2018 Oscar for Best Original Screenplay. His efforts don't stop there, as he's revived The Twilight Zone and will be producing a new version of Candyman from a screenplay he co-wrote with Win Rosenfeld and Nia DaCosta, who is directing the film, which stars Yahya Abdul-Mateen II.